Let me tell you something nobody prepares you for. It's not the moment he leaves. It's not even the moment you find out he left you pregnant for another woman. It's the silence that comes after. The kind of silence that sits at the edge of your bed at night. The kind that hums louder than the refrigerator. The kind that whispers, "How did you not see this coming?" I was 7 months pregnant when my husband packed his things. 7 months pregnant. My ankles were swelling, my back ached, and I couldn't even see my own feet. But somehow, I was expected to stand there with dignity while he explained that he'd fallen in love. Fallen. Like it was an accident. Like he tripped over her on the way to the mailbox. Have you ever noticed how men say they fell in love, like gravity forced them? Like they slipped on a banana peel and landed in somebody else's arms? I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood there holding my belly, holding our son, while he told me he deserved happiness. Deserved. I remember thinking, what about us? But I didn't ask. And that right there, that silence, that was my first mistake. See, when you're raised to keep the peace, you learn how to swallow words like vitamins, big ones, the kind that get stuck halfway down. You convince yourself that being calm makes you strong. But sometimes, calm just makes you quiet enough to be left. He said she understood him, said she made him feel alive again. I wanted to ask when exactly he died. Was it before or after I carried his child? But instead, I nodded. Ladies, have you ever nodded when you should have walked out? That nod cost me years. Now here's the part nobody tells you about being left while pregnant. People don't just look at you with pity. They look at you like you failed a test you didn't know you were taking. Churchwomen whisper, family members tilt their heads and say, "Well, everything happens for a reason." You ever want to politely say, "If one more person tells me that, I'm going to give them a reason"? But I didn't. I went home to an empty house that still smelled like his cologne. I folded the baby clothes by myself. I assembled a crib with instructions that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. And every night, my son would kick. Like he knew something wasn't right. I would rub my belly and whisper, "It's just us now, baby." And I meant it. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that years later, that same man who walked out so confidently would be sitting alone in a folding chair at a graduation ceremony. Alone. No wife, no cheering section, just regret sitting heavy on his shoulders. But before we get there, before we talk about that day, you need to understand what it took to survive the years in between. Because the leaving, that was just the beginning. And what happened next changed both of us forever. Now let me tell you what nobody applauds. They don't applaud the woman who gets up the next morning anyway. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no slow-motion strength montage, just me, a swollen body, and a sink full of dishes he didn't bother to wash before he left. Isn't it funny how the man who says he's starting over never starts by cleaning the kitchen? Anyway, I went into labor 3 weeks after he moved in with her. 3 weeks. And yes, I called him. Not because I needed him, but because I believed fathers should at least show up for the beginning. He didn't answer. He texted. "Can't make it. I'm out of town." Out of town. Ladies, have you ever wanted to throw a phone across the room but remembered you still had to pay for it? So I delivered my son with my sister holding my hand and a nurse telling me to breathe, like I wasn't bringing a whole human being into the world alone. When they placed him on my chest, everything went quiet. Not hospital quiet, soul quiet. I looked at his tiny face and said, "It's me and you, baby, and we're gonna be just fine." Now, I won't lie to you, the first year was brutal. Postpartum hormones, midnight feedings, bills stacked like unpaid apologies, and every so often I'd hear through the grapevine how happy he was. New apartment, new woman, new life, new responsibilities? Not so much. Child support came late more than it came on time. Excuses came faster than diapers. And every time I thought about calling him to argue, I'd look at my son asleep in his crib and ask myself one question: do I want to be right, or do I want to be peaceful? That question saved me, because anger is expensive. It costs sleep, it costs focus, it costs the very energy you need to raise a child. So I made a decision. I would not raise my son on bitterness. Now, don't misunderstand me. I felt it. Oh, I felt it. There were nights I cried so hard I scared myself. There were mornings I stared at the ceiling wondering how I'd stretch $40 into a week's worth of groceries. But something happened around year 2. I stopped waiting for him to regret leaving, and I started building a life he couldn't recognize. I went back to school part-time, took online classes after my son went to bed. I learned how to fix a leaking sink from YouTube. I mowed my own lawn, and let me tell you, there's something powerful about pushing a lawnmower in your own yard knowing nobody's coming to rescue you. Have you ever surprised yourself like that? One day you're crying in the shower, and the next you're assembling furniture without instructions like you've got a degree in engineering. That's survival. But here's the part that might surprise you. He would call sometimes. Not for the baby, not really. He'd call to check if I was doing okay. Translation, he wanted reassurance that I hadn't fallen apart. And every time he heard strength in my voice, there was this pause. A long one. Like he was realizing something didn't go the way he expected. But he still didn't know the half of it. Because while he was busy chasing what felt good, I was raising what mattered. And the older my son got, the more questions he began to ask. Questions about his father. Questions I knew were coming. And the way I answered them, that would shape everything that happened years later, especially the day of that graduation. But we're not there yet. Not quite. Now let's talk about the questions. Because if you've ever raised a child alone, you already know. It's not the diapers that break you. It's the questions. The first time my son asked about his father, he was 5. 5. We were at the park. He was watching another little boy get lifted into the air by his dad, laughing like the world was perfect. My son tugged on my sleeve and said, "Mama, where's my daddy?" And there it was, the moment I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. I could have said, he left us. I could have said he chose someone else. I could have said a whole lot of things that would have been true. But instead, I knelt down and said, "Your daddy loves you. He just doesn't know how to be here the way he should." Now let me ask you something. Have you ever protected someone who hurt you just so your child wouldn't have to carry that weight? That's a different kind of strength. Because make no mistake, I wasn't protecting him for my ex-husband's sake. I was protecting my son's heart. Children don't separate themselves from their parents. If you say, "Your father is selfish," what they hear is, "Half of you is selfish." And I refuse to plant that seed. Now, did his father show up consistently? No. Birthdays were complicated. Holidays were busy. Soccer games were out of town. But you know what never missed? A social media post about his new life. Oh yes, new vacations, new furniture, new baby with the woman he left me for. And I'd be lying if I said that didn't sting. There's something about seeing the man who said he was overwhelmed suddenly thriving somewhere else. It messes with your head if you let it. But here's what I learned. You can't measure your healing against someone else's highlight reel. So instead of stalking his page, I started documenting ours. Not for Instagram, not for applause, for memory. First lost tooth, first spelling bee, first time he rode a bike without training wheels and fell straight into a bush. Yes, a bush. We laughed so hard we forgot to check if he was bleeding. Don't judge me, he was fine. Those were our moments. And slowly, something beautiful happened. My son stopped asking where his father was. Not because he didn't care, but because he felt secure. He had stability, he had routine, he had love that showed up every single day. Now, here's where things get complicated. When he turned 12, his father decided he wanted more involvement. Not because he suddenly found a parenting manual, because his second marriage was starting to crack. Funny how that works. When things fall apart over there, suddenly they want to reconnect over here. He called, sounding older, tired, said he wanted to be a better father. And I sat there holding the phone, staring at my now nearly teenage son doing homework at the kitchen table. Part of me wanted to say, "You're 12 years late." But another part of me remembered that this wasn't about me. It was about the boy. So I said yes. And that decision, that door I reopened, it would lead to something none of us were prepared for, especially him. Now, when I said yes, I didn't say it lightly. I didn't throw open the door and roll out a welcome mat. Oh no, I set boundaries, clear ones. You want to see him? You show up. You want to call him? You call consistently. No disappearing acts, no last-minute excuses, no "something came up." Because let me tell you something about boys. They may act tough, but rejection cuts deep. And I refused to let my son relive what I survived. The first visit was awkward. Picture this. My living room, freshly vacuumed, my son sitting upright like he was waiting for a job interview, his father standing at the door holding a basketball like that was going to fix 12 years. A basketball. I almost laughed. Almost. But I didn't. I stepped aside and said, "He's been waiting." And I meant that in more ways than one. They sat on the couch, small talk floating in the air like dust nobody wanted to acknowledge. "You're getting big. What grade are you in? You like sports?" Surface-level questions for a relationship that had never been deep. But here's the part that surprised me. My son didn't cling. He didn't light up the way I thought he might. He was polite, respectful, but guarded. And I realized something in that moment. You can't step into a child's life like a substitute teacher and expect to be called dad. Trust takes time, and time is something he had already wasted. Now, over the next few months, he tried. I'll give him that. He showed up to a couple of basketball games, took him out for burgers on Saturdays, even helped with a science project once, though let's just say the volcano looked more like a melted cake. Have you ever watched someone try to make up for years in weeks? It's exhausting to witness. Because here's the truth nobody says out loud. Guilt looks a lot like effort in the beginning, but effort without consistency fades. And sure enough, the cracks started showing. Calls became less frequent, visits were rescheduled, one weekend turned into next weekend turned into silence. My son noticed. He didn't cry, he didn't ask questions, he just stopped mentioning him. And that quiet, that hurt more than tears. One night, I found him sitting at the kitchen table long after dinner. I asked what he was doing. He shrugged and said, "Nothing." But mamas know. I sat down and said, "You can tell me." He looked at me, not angry, not even sad, just thoughtful. And he said something I will never forget. "Mom, if he wanted to be here, he would, right?" That question, that simple, heartbreaking question. And I had to choose my words carefully, because how I answered would shape how he saw himself. I took his hand and said, "Sometimes adults make choices that have nothing to do with how valuable you are." He nodded slowly, but I could see it. He was learning something, learning not to expect too much. And that lesson would follow him all the way to high school, all the way to graduation day. And his father still had no idea what it was costing him. By the time my son reached high school, something had shifted. Not just in him, in me. See, somewhere between late-night homework sessions and early morning bus stops, I stopped seeing myself as the woman who was left. I started seeing myself as the woman who stayed up, stayed strong, stayed present. And that changes you. High school years are no joke. Hormones, peer pressure, dreams bigger than your bank account. And through it all, it was still just us at the kitchen table most nights. Now, his father, he'd drift in and out like a radio station with bad reception. Clear for a moment, then static. He came to one parent-teacher conference during freshman year, sat beside me like we were a united front, nodded at the teacher's praise like he'd been supervising homework every night. I let him have that moment because here's something I learned. Sometimes you don't interrupt a man's illusion. You just let reality correct it later. Have you ever noticed how some people want credit for seeds they never watered? But my son noticed. Oh, he noticed. On the ride home, he looked out the window and said, "He acts different at school." I asked, "Different how?" He shrugged, like he wants people to think he's more involved. Now that right there, that was awareness. And awareness is powerful. I didn't badmouth his father. I didn't agree or disagree. I just said, people show you who they are over time. And time kept showing him. Missed birthday dinners, forgotten promises about college visits, last-minute cancellations because work ran late. Meanwhile, my son was thriving. Honor roll, basketball team captain, part-time job at the grocery store. And let me tell you something. Watching your child develop character without resentment is one of the greatest rewards of quiet strength. He wasn't bitter, he was observant, and that's different. Now here's where things take an unexpected turn. Junior year, he received a letter, a college recruitment letter, full scholarship consideration. I remember holding that envelope like it was made of gold. My hands shook, not because I doubted him, but because I knew what it meant. Opportunity, freedom, validation. All the nights of sacrifice had led to this. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he once asked me if his father would show up, and opened that letter together. He read it twice, then looked at me and said, "You did this." I laughed and said, "No, baby, you did." But deep down, I knew something. His father would want to be part of this moment. Of course he would. Success attracts spectators. And sure enough, within a week of that news traveling through family circles, my phone rang. Guess who? He sounded excited, proud, like he'd been there every step of the way. And then he said something that made me pause. I always knew he'd do great things. Always knew. That phrase hung in the air because knowing and nurturing are two very different things. Still, I invited him to the upcoming college signing event. And that day planted the first real seed of regret in his eyes. But the graduation would be something else entirely. The college signing day came faster than I expected. You know how life does that? Crawls when you're struggling, then sprints when you're finally catching your breath. We held the signing ceremony in the high school gym. Folding chairs, proud parents, banners hanging from the ceiling like quiet witnesses to years of effort. I got there early. Of course I did. Mothers like me always get there early. We bring extra tissues, we fix crooked ties, we pretend we're not emotional when really our hearts are doing backflips. My son walked in wearing a button-down shirt I bought on sale, but ironed like it was designer. He looked taller that day. Not just physically. Certain moments age your child forward. And then his father walked in, dressed sharp, confident smile, handshakes ready. If you didn't know the backstory, you'd think he had been the study foundation all along. He came over to us, clapped our son on the shoulder, and said, "This is what hard work looks like." I watched my son's face carefully. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Now here's something I've learned after years of observing quietly. Children grow up to adults who remember patterns, not performances. One ceremony doesn't erase years of absence. During the signing, when my son sat at that long table with the scholarship papers in front of him, they asked for parents to stand behind him for photos. Parents, plural. There was a slight hesitation. Just a second. His father stepped forward quickly. I stepped forward too. We stood on either side of him. The cameras flashed. But in that flash, I saw something I hadn't seen before: regret. It was subtle, a flicker in his father's expression when the principal began thanking the parents who supported these students through every challenge. Every challenge. The words hit differently when you know you weren't there for most of them. After the ceremony, people congratulated him, shook his hand, said things like, "You must be so proud." And he nodded. Very proud. But pride without participation feels hollow. On the drive home, it was just me and my son again. He held the signed scholarship papers in his lap and said, "Mom, I'm glad you were there." I teased him and said, "Where else would I be?" He looked straight ahead and replied quietly, "Exactly." That word sat heavy. Exactly. He didn't say anything negative about his father. He didn't need to. Because here's the thing about maturity: it doesn't shout, it understands. And I knew then that graduation would be different. Bigger crowd, bigger milestone, bigger spotlight. His father would want a front row seat. But what he didn't realize was this: seats are assigned by presence long before the ceremony, and some chairs, no matter how close to the stage, still feel very far away. Graduation day was coming, and none of us truly understood what that day would reveal. Not about success, not about forgiveness, but about consequence. Graduation morning arrived bright and loud. You know the kind of morning I'm talking about. The sun feels intentional, like even the sky knows something important is happening. I was up before my alarm, made breakfast he barely touched because nerves had taken over, adjusted his cap 3 times, told him to stand straight at least 5. Mothers don't retire from giving instructions. We just repeat them softer. "Mom," he laughed, "I got it." But I didn't just see a graduate. I saw the 5-year-old at the park asking where his daddy was. I saw the 12-year-old sitting at the kitchen table trying not to care. I saw the teenager who learned how to turn disappointment into discipline. And today, he was walking across a stage. Now, let's talk about seating. The school auditorium was huge. Rows and rows of metal folding chairs set up on the football field. Families claiming territory with programs and purses like it was a competitive sport. I arrived early, again. But this time, something was different. My son had given me specific instructions the night before. "Mom, I saved you a seat in the front section." Front section, reserved for immediate family. And then he said something else. "There's only one." Only one. I didn't ask questions. I didn't suggest inviting his father to sit with me. I simply nodded, because by then I understood. My son was no longer a boy navigating confusion. He was a young man making decisions. When his father arrived, he looked around confidently at first, scanning, expecting. He spotted me near the front and started walking in my direction. Then he noticed. 1 chair, not 2. His smile flickered, just slightly. He leaned down and asked, "Is this section full?" I met his eyes and said gently, "He reserved 1 seat." There are moments in life when silence speaks louder than any speech. That was one of them. He nodded slowly, straightened his jacket, and walked back. Further back. Row after row, until he found an empty chair near the middle. Alone. And here's the thing. Nobody told him to sit there. Nobody embarrassed him. Nobody argued. The distance wasn't created in that moment. It had been building for years. Now, when the ceremony started, the band played and the graduates began walking in, the crowd erupted in cheers. I stood when my son's name was called, clapped so hard my hands stung, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw his father stand too. But from where he was sitting, his view wasn't clear. People in front of him blocked the stage. He shifted left, then right, trying to see, trying to capture a picture on his phone through a sea of raised arms. And I couldn't help but think, that's what absence does. It leaves you reaching. When my son crossed the stage, he didn't look into the middle rows. He looked straight ahead, toward the front, toward the one seat that had never been empty. And in that split second, something broke. Not in me, in him. Because for the first time, he wasn't watching what he lost. He was watching what he missed. And graduation wasn't even over yet. After the diplomas were handed out and the tassels were turned, the field exploded in celebration. Air horns, balloons, grandmothers crying into lace handkerchiefs, cameras flashing like paparazzi at a red carpet event. I made my way toward the graduate section, weaving through families, calling out names like they were summoning miracles. And then I saw him, my son. Cap slightly crooked, diploma clutched in his hand, scanning the crowd. But he wasn't searching frantically. He knew where I was. When our eyes met, he smiled, that deep, settled smile, the kind that doesn't need validation, the kind that says, "We did it." He walked straight toward me. Not left, not right, straight ahead. And when he reached me, he wrapped his arms around my shoulders, tight, longer than usual. "Thank you," he whispered. Now listen, I had prepared myself for tears that day. But that whisper? That did it. Because gratitude from a child who has grown into a man hits differently. Over his shoulder, I saw his father standing about 20 feet away, waiting, not sure if he should step forward or hang back. That's the thing about inconsistency. It makes you unsure of your place. My son eventually turned and saw him. There was no anger in his face, no dramatic tension, just recognition. He walked over, shook his father's hand first, a handshake. Then, after a brief pause, they hugged. Quick, polite, measured. Have you ever hugged someone and felt the history between you like a wall? That's what it looked like. His father patted his back and said loudly, "I'm proud of you, son." And my son replied, "Thank you." 2 words. Respectful, but not intimate. They took a picture together, just the two of them. In the photo, you'd see a proud father and successful graduate. You wouldn't see the missed birthdays, the canceled weekends, the unanswered calls. Pictures freeze moments. They don't capture patterns. Now here's where the story shifts. As families began leaving, my son said something unexpected. He turned to both of us and said, "There's something I want to say." We stepped aside near the bleachers. The noise of celebration hummed in the background, but in that circle, it felt quiet. He looked at his father first. "I'm glad you came." Simple, honest. Then he added, "But I need you to understand something." And I saw it. The maturity, the clarity, the years of observation forming into words. His father straightened slightly, as if bracing himself. My son continued, "Mom didn't just support me, she was there, every time, and I ever want that overlooked. Not angry, not attacking, just factual. And facts can be heavier than accusations." When my son finished speaking, there was no dramatic music, no shouting, no cinematic confrontation, just wind moving across the field and the distant sound of another family celebrating. But in that small circle near the bleachers, something irreversible had happened. Truth had been spoken calmly. And calm truth? That's powerful. His father cleared his throat. You know that sound men make when they're buying time? When they're trying to gather words that don't come easily? He said, "I know I haven't always been there." Always. That word tried to soften years into something manageable. My son didn't argue. He didn't list examples. He didn't bring up specific disappointments. He simply said, "I'm not angry. I just learned not to expect too much." Now listen to that again. Not angry, just adjusted. That sentence hit harder than any accusation ever could. Because anger means there's still hope for change. Adjustment means acceptance. And acceptance means you've already grieved what you didn't get. His father looked at him, really looked at him, like he was seeing the man his son had become for the first time. And maybe he was. He glanced at me briefly. There was no hostility in my expression, no victory either, just peace. And that peace probably confused him more than bitterness ever would have. Have you ever noticed how people expect you to still be broken? They brace for your resentment. But when you've healed, when you're steady, they don't know where to stand. My son checked his phone. Friends were calling him over for pictures. Before he walked away, he did something unexpected. He hugged his father again, this time slightly longer, but still measured. Then he turned to me and said, "I'll meet you by the car." And just like that, he stepped into his future, leaving us standing there, two people connected by history, but separated by choices. His father finally spoke. "You did a good job." 3 simple words. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't a confession, but it was acknowledgement. And sometimes acknowledgement is the closest some people can get to remorse. I nodded and said, "He did the work." Because I needed him to understand something. Yes, I showed up. Yes, I sacrificed. But our son built himself through discipline and resilience. We stood there in silence for a few seconds longer. Then he said something I never expected to hear. I missed a lot. Not defensive, not justified, just honest. And that honesty, it was years late, but it was real. The question was, what would he do with that realization now? Because regret can either transform you or haunt you. And over the next few months, I would find out which one he chose. The weeks after graduation felt different, quieter, not because life slowed down, if anything, it sped up. College preparations, dorm shopping, financial paperwork, the kind of busy that reminds you your child is really leaving. But underneath all that movement, something else was shifting. His father started calling more. Not random check-ins, not surface-level small talk, real conversations. At first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was graduation guilt. You know, that emotional hangover people get after a milestone reminds them of what they missed. But then my son mentioned something one evening while we were sorting through dorm supplies. He asked if we could grab lunch, just us. I paused mid-fold. And? He said he wants to understand who I am now. Now. That word carries weight when you've missed the before. I didn't tell my son what to do. I never had. I just asked, "Do you want to go?" He thought for a moment. "Yeah, I think I do." So they met at a small diner across town, neutral territory. When he came home, I tried to act casual, like I wasn't sitting on the edge of emotional curiosity. "So," I said lightly, "how was it?" He sat down at the kitchen table, our table, and exhaled. It was different. Different how? He didn't talk about himself much. He asked about me, about college, about my plans, about what I needed. Needed. That's a word fathers are supposed to know early, but some men learn late. Over the next couple of months, they met more often. Lunches, a college campus tour, a long drive where apparently they talked about mistakes. Real ones. His father admitted he had been selfish, said he confused excitement with fulfillment, said he thought there was always be time to fix things later. Have you ever noticed how later feels infinite until it doesn't? By the time you realize what mattered, the season has already changed. Now here's the part that surprised me most. My son forgave him. Not in a dramatic way, not in a let's pretend it never happened way, but in a steady, grounded way. He told me one night, I don't want to carry something that heavy into my future. That's maturity. Forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let it control your direction. And his father? He started showing up differently. Not perfectly, but consistently. Phone calls every Sunday night, helping move boxes into the dorm, sitting through orientation sessions without checking his watch. It was like he finally understood something simple but profound. Presence is built in small, repeated moments. But here's the truth no one says out loud. Even when redemption begins, it doesn't erase the memory of absence. Some chairs, once empty for too long, never quite feel the same. And as I watched them slowly rebuild something resembling a relationship, I realized something about myself, too. I had spent years surviving, then years stabilizing, and now I was stepping into a season I hadn't prepared for, letting go. Because raising a child alone is one thing, releasing him into the world, that's another graduation entirely, and mine was just beginning. College move-in day came with cardboard boxes and quiet realizations. We packed the car like we were loading up 18 years of memories. Blankets I had washed 100 times, picture frames, a lamp he insisted on bringing because the dorm lighting is terrible. Mothers notice those details. Fathers notice the mileage. His father met us at campus, and this time he didn't arrive with performance energy. No loud greetings, no oversized gestures, just steady. Carrying boxes, asking where things should go, listening more than speaking. There's something humbling about helping your child build a life you weren't fully present for. While we were setting up his dorm room, my son stepped out with friends to handle paperwork. For the first time in years, his father and I were alone, just the two of us, in a half-furnished dorm room that smelled like new beginnings. He sat down on the edge of the bed and looked around slowly. "This should have felt different," he said. I didn't respond right away, because sometimes silence invites honesty. He continued. When I left, I thought I was choosing happiness. I didn't realize I was choosing distance. Distance. That word landed heavy. He rubbed his hands together like he was warming them in cold air. "You know what hurt the most?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer. Sitting back there at graduation, watching other dads in the front row, hearing their kids call out to them. He swallowed. I built my own middle row. Now listen, that right there, that was the first time he truly owned it. Not blamed timing, not blamed circumstances, not blamed me. Owned it. He looked at me, not as the woman he left, but as the woman who endured. I don't know if I ever said I'm sorry. There it was. Late, but real. And here's the thing about apologies that come years after the wound. They don't erase the scar, but they acknowledge it exists. I nodded slowly. We were young, I said, but we weren't helpless, because that's the truth. He wasn't confused. He was selfish. There's a difference. He exhaled and said something that told me everything I needed to know. She left 2 years ago. The other woman, the one he thought was his new beginning, gone. Turns out, he said softly, you can't build something stable on unfinished business. Have you ever watched someone realize too late that what felt exciting wasn't sustainable? He missed birthdays for a thrill. He missed school plays for temporary validation. And now he was helping his son arrange books on a dorm shelf, trying to be present in a chapter that was already halfway written. Before we left campus that day, my son hugged us both. Equal. Respectful. But when he looked at me, there was something deeper. Security. And when he looked at his father, there was grace. Not dependency, grace. As we drove home separately, I thought about that graduation chair, about how consequences don't scream. They sit quietly in the middle row, and I realized something profound. He didn't sit alone because I punished him. He sat alone because presence can't be backdated. And that was a lesson neither of us would ever forget. After we left him at that dorm, the house felt different. Too neat, too quiet. No basketball shoes by the door, no late-night refrigerator raids, no music playing through thin bedroom walls. Just me, and 18 years of echoes. I walked into his room and sat on the edge of the bed. For a moment, I let myself feel it all. The exhaustion, the pride, the ache of letting go. Because here's something nobody tells single mothers. You spend years being strong, and then one day the job changes. You're no longer protecting, you're releasing, and that requires a different kind of courage. A few weeks later, his father called. Not about tuition, not about logistics. He said, "I've been thinking about that day. Graduation. The middle row," he added quietly. I didn't say anything. He continued, "I thought leaving meant I was choosing happiness. I didn't understand I was giving up the front seat to my own son's life." There it was, the full weight of it. You see, when he left me pregnant, he thought he was walking towards freedom, but what he was really walking away from was daily intimacy. The small things, bedtime stories, science fairs, inside jokes that only develop when you show up consistently. He missed the ordinary, and ordinary is where love grows. Now let me ask you something. How many times did we stay silent because we didn't want to seem dramatic? How many times did we nod when we should have spoken? How many times did we confuse patience with invisibility? If I could go back to that 7-month pregnant woman standing in the living room while her husband packed his bags, I wouldn't tell her to beg, I wouldn't tell her to scream, I would tell her this: don't measure your worth by who walks away. Because the person who stays, who builds, who nurtures, who shows up day after day, holds the real power. Years later, when I look back at that graduation day, I don't see revenge. I don't see triumph. I see alignment. One chair in the front row, one chair in the middle. Not assigned by anger, assigned by consistency. And here's the final truth. He didn't lose me when he left. He lost proximity to the miracle we were building. He lost the front row view of growth that only comes from staying through the boring days. But my son, though, he gained something powerful. He learned that love is proven in presence, that promises mean nothing without repetition, that forgiveness is freedom, but accountability is necessary. And me? I learned that silence can protect peace, but it should never cost your voice. So if you're listening to this and you're in that quiet house tonight, wondering if you were enough, let me tell you something clearly. If you stayed, if you showed up, if you built stability out of heartbreak, you were more than enough. And one day, whether anyone else admits it or not, the seating arrangement will tell the truth. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. If this story touched your heart, like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories about resilience, dignity, and quiet justice. Because some lessons don't come with applause. They come with peace.